Imagine a town where joy itself is forbidden. A place so tucked away from the rest of the world that it seems almost forgotten, yet its silence speaks louder than words. Behind the cheerful facade of its charming streets and old brick houses, something darker has been written into the very fabric of its existence. You might mistake the quiet for peace, but those who live there know better. In this town, a smile is not a gesture of kindness, it's a warning, a signal that the darkness has found its next target. And the most chilling part? No one will ever speak of what happens after the smile fades. Today, I'll tell you why. Welcome to Mr. Creep's Nightmares, where the stories we share aren't just meant to unsettle you, they're meant to linger in the corners of your mind, long after the screen has gone dark. Tonight, we unravel a tale unlike any other, a tale of a town so ordinary on the surface that you could easily drive through it without giving it a second glance. A place with neatly trimmed hedges, quiet streets, and smiling faces, if only those smiles weren't hiding something so profoundly disturbing. Because behind the scenes of this picturesque community lies a darkness that defies reason. It's a darkness that turns happiness into danger, that twists joy into a trap. You see, in this town, a smile isn't just a sign of kindness or connection. It's a mark, a warning, that the one who dared to let their guard down may soon disappear. The people here know the rules, though they would never speak of them. Keep your face neutral. Don't laugh. Don't smile. Don't let the weight of the silence get to you, no matter how unbearable it feels. For those who break this unwritten law, the consequences are swift and permanent. The locals call it a curse, though what it truly is remains shrouded in fear, whispered in hushed tones, and hinted at in fleeting glances. Tonight, I'll take you inside this town. You'll learn about its past, its secrets, and the chilling truth behind its one unbreakable rule. But I must warn you, this story won't end with easy answers or comforting resolutions. The truth, when you finally hear it, will leave you questioning not just this town, but the very nature of joy itself. Before we begin, let me say this: if you find yourself drawn to the eerie, the unexplained, and the kinds of stories that don't let you sleep peacefully, you're in the right place. Subscribe now, and don't forget to hit the notification bell, because here at Mr. Creep's Nightmares, we delve into the corners of the world that most people are too afraid to explore. Are you ready to step into the shadows? Then settle in, because tonight's story will take you somewhere you've never been before, and where you may never want to return. Far from bustling cities and highways that stretch endlessly, there is a town nestled in isolation, surrounded by dense forests that feel alive with secrets and cliffs that seem to rise as a natural fortress against the outside world. It isn't a place you would stumble upon easily. The roads leading to it are unmarked, the maps omit it as though it were a blemish best forgotten. But for those who live there, it is home of a home they never leave and never speak of. When the outsider first arrived, they thought the silence of the town was its charm. A reprieve from the chaos of the world. The streets were lined with quaint houses, their windows framed by curtains that never moved. The air was thick with mist, curling around lampposts and seeping into every corner, giving the place an almost timeless quality. But there was something else, something unspoken, hanging in the air like a shadow that refused to fade. At first, they didn't notice the way people avoided eye contact, how conversations were clipped and hurried, or the way laughter seemed absent, as though it had been deliberately removed from the fabric of life here. What caught their attention was the sign. It was small, almost easy to miss, placed discreetly at the town's entrance. It read, "Welcome to Greystone." No smiling. They thought it was a joke. A quirky, small town charm meant to make visitors chuckle. But no one in the town seemed amused. Instead, their faces remained carefully blank, their expressions guarded, their movements deliberate. It wasn't long before the outsider began to sense it, that behind the silence, something darker was lurking, something far more oppressive than the mist that clung to the ground. Among the locals, two faces stood out. There was the elderly historian, a man who spent his days in the town's small library, surrounded by dusty books and faded photographs. His eyes held a knowing sadness, and when he spoke, it was with the weight of someone who carried a burden too great to share. And then there was the teenager, a defiant spark in a town that seemed determined to extinguish every flame. They moved with a restlessness, a curiosity that stood out in stark contrast to the careful monotony of the townsfolk. The outsiders' curiosity grew, but their questions were met with the same response: silence. Until one day, a child, unaware of the weight of the town's rules, offered the outsider a small, hand-carved figurine. It was a simple gesture, but it caught the outsider off guard, and before they could stop themselves, a smile spread across their face. The reaction was immediate. The child froze, their eyes widening in fear. Nearby, an elderly woman dropped her groceries, retreating into the shadows of an alley. The few others who had been nearby quickly disappeared, their hurried footsteps echoing through the empty street. And then came the whisper. The child, trembling, barely managed to say the words, "You shouldn't have done that. It's watching." The outsider laughed nervously, brushing it off as an overreaction. But as the day turned to evening, they began to feel it, the weight of unseen eyes. A sense of being followed, though every time they turned around, there was nothing there. And yet, the feeling never left. It grew heavier with each passing moment, pressing down on them like an invisible hand. That night, the teenager found the outsider sitting on the steps of the inn, their expression a mix of fear and confusion. "You smiled, didn't you?" they asked, their voice low. Before the outsider could answer, the teenager continued, their words spilling out in a rush. "You've been marked. It doesn't matter if it was an accident. It saw you." The outsider tried to push for answers, but the teenager only shook their head, glancing nervously over their shoulder. "If you want to live, you need to leave," they said, their voice trembling. "But even then, it might not let you." As the night stretched on, the outsider began to understand what they had stumbled into. The town wasn't quiet by choice. It was quiet because the people here were trapped by a rule that wasn't just a rule but a survival mechanism. And now, the outsider had broken it. They had smiled, and whatever force governed this place had noticed. Little did they know, their small act of defiance was only the beginning. The true cost of their smile was yet to be revealed. The outsider couldn't leave the events of that day alone. The fear in the child's eyes, the hurried retreat of the townsfolk, and the teenager's cryptic warning all pointed to something far deeper than a quirky rule about smiling. Determined to uncover the truth, they began asking questions, though each attempt was met with resistance. Locals avoided their gaze, muttering excuses as they shuffled away. But persistence eventually led them to the library, where the elderly historian resided, a man who seemed both reluctant to share and burdened by the weight of knowing too much. The historian's voice was quiet, his words carefully chosen, as though even speaking of the town's past carried a cost. He began with the story of a tragedy from centuries ago, one the town had never recovered from. Back then, Greystone was a bustling community, filled with laughter, music, and celebration. It was said that the town's joy could be heard echoing through the valleys. But one fateful festival night, that joy turned to despair. No one knows exactly how it began, but by morning, half the town's population had vanished without a trace. Those who remained whispered of shadowy figures and a presence that seemed to thrive on the happiness that once filled the streets. They called it the Watcher, a being that fed on joy, drawn to it like a moth to a flame. Smiles, laughter, even the smallest expressions of happiness became dangerous. The town elders, desperate to protect what was left of their people, imposed the rule: no smiling, no laughter, no joy. The outsider listened, skeptical but intrigued. They pressed the historian for more details, but he only shook his head, his gaze distant. "It's better if you don't know," he muttered. "Some truths are too dangerous." Still, the outsider couldn't ignore the unease that seemed to grow with each passing moment. As days turned into nights, strange events began to unfold. It started subtly, the sound of distant laughter echoing through empty streets, growing louder as the fog thickened. At first, the outsider thought it was a trick of the mind, but then came the symbols, carved into walls, trees, even the wooden beams of the inn. They were crude, jagged shapes, almost like faces twisted in agony. Act 2 began when the outsider realized they were no longer just an observer, they had become a target. It began with fleeting glimpses of movement in mirrors and windows, shapes that disappeared the moment they turned to look. At night, their sleep was interrupted by whispers, faint but unmistakable, urging them with an unsettling clarity, smile just once more. Desperate for answers, they sought out the teenager, the only person who seemed willing to acknowledge the truth. Under the cover of darkness, the teenager led them to an abandoned shed at the edge of town. Inside, they unearthed an old journal, its pages filled with frantic handwriting and sketches that seemed almost alive with anguish. The teenager explained that it belonged to someone who had tried, and failed, to end the curse. The journal detailed rituals, failed attempts to confront the Watcher, and the ultimate price paid by those who dared to defy it. But the outsider's investigation had not gone unnoticed. The townsfolk, once distant but indifferent, now seemed hostile. Their expressions grew colder, their whispers sharper. One evening, a woman grabbed the outsider's arm and hissed, "Smiling has consequences, always." Act 3 revealed the heart of the curse. The outsider's relentless questioning led them back to the historian, who at last broke his silence, though his voice trembled with fear. He spoke of a pact, forged generations ago by the town's ancestors. Faced with famine and despair, they called upon a malevolent entity, offering their joy as payment for prosperity. The deal worked, but at a cost far greater than they could have imagined. "Happiness is no longer ours to give," the historian said, his eyes hollow. "And anyone who breaks the rule pays the price." The outsider demanded to know more. What was the Watcher? Could it be stopped? The historian hesitated before confessing his own dark secret. He had smiled once, long ago. He had been marked, just as the outsider had been, but unlike others, he had survived, by sacrificing someone close to him. The revelation sent a chill through the outsider. The symbols, the whispers, the laughter, they were not warnings. They were promises. The Watcher was coming, and no rule, no ritual, no act of defiance could stop it. The weight of the historian's confession lingered in the air like a heavy fog. The outsider, now aware of their fate, felt a sense of dread creeping closer with every passing moment. It wasn't just a story or a curse, it was a living force, an entity that thrived on joy, twisting the purest emotions into fuel for its insatiable hunger. The historian's final words echoed in their mind, "It saw you." As night fell, the signs became undeniable. The laughter that had once seemed distant now circled closer, moving like an invisible presence through the streets. Shadows grew thicker, darker, and longer, stretching toward the outsider no matter which way they turned. The whispers, once faint, were now clear. "You cannot hide. You cannot escape." With the teenager's help, the outsider pieced together the fragments of the ritual detailed in the journal. It wasn't a solution, it was a desperate act, a way to delay the inevitable. The ritual required items that bore the weight of joy, a child's toy, a wedding ring, a photograph of laughter frozen in time. Each item had to be burned in a specific order while the entity's name was spoken aloud, though even the journal refused to write its full name, offering only broken phrases and ominous warnings. The final instruction chilled them to the core: the one who performs this ritual must sacrifice the last thing that made them smile. The outsider and the teenager gathered the items, the teenager's hands shaking as they carried a bundle wrapped in cloth. They moved through the darkened streets, every sound amplified, every shadow alive with the sense of being watched. They reached the center of town, where an ancient stone circle stood, a place that seemed older than the town itself, older than anything they could comprehend. The ritual began, each item thrown into the fire causing the air to tremble, as if the town itself were holding its breath. But as the final object was placed into the flames, the ground began to quake. The laughter, which had been disembodied and scattered, now became a single, echoing voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. And then, it appeared. No words could fully describe what they saw. It wasn't a creature, nor a shadow, it was a presence that filled the space around them, twisting the air into shapes that didn't belong. Its form shifted, flickering between glimpses of faces twisted in joy and agony. It spoke without words, its voice pressing directly into their minds. "You thought you could take back what is mine?" The outsider, trembling, recited the final words of the ritual. For a moment, the laughter stopped, replaced by a silence so complete it felt suffocating. The present recoiled, its shape unraveling, and for a brief, fleeting moment, the outsider thought they had succeeded. But then the teenager screamed. The watcher turned its attention to them, and in that instant, the outsider understood the cost of their actions. The ritual hadn't ended the curse, it had fed it. The watcher wasn't banished, it was growing stronger, feeding on the sacrifice. As the teenager's cries faded into the night, the laughter returned, louder than before, reverberating through the air as if the entity were mocking them. The outsider fled, running blindly through the streets, past houses with windows that now seemed like eyes, watching their every move. They didn't stop until they reached their car, parked just outside the town's limits. Throwing open the door, they fumbled with the keys, their hands shaking, their mind racing. When the engine roared to life, they felt a fleeting sense of relief, but as they glanced at the rearview mirror, their heart stopped. Scratched into the glass, faint but unmistakable, were the words, "You smiled. It saw you." The laughter was there again, distant yet growing closer. The outsider drove into the night, but no matter how far they went, the feeling never left. The watcher had seen them, marked them, and somewhere in the darkness, it was waiting. And as they gripped the steering wheel, one terrible thought crept into their mind: what if this wasn't the end? What if it had only just begun? And so, the town fades from view, shrouded once more in its veil of mist and secrecy, its unspoken rules continuing to bind its people in fear. For those who live there, the weight of the curse is their reality, an existence lived in silence, where even the smallest flicker of joy could bring about their end. The watcher remains, unseen yet ever present, its hunger unquenched and its gaze unrelenting. But the story doesn't truly end with the town or even with the outsider who dared to smile. The real question lingers: how far does the reach of such a thing extend? Can a force like the watcher be confined to one place, or does its presence seep into the world beyond, waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to break its rule? You might think yourself safe, far away from that quiet, isolated town. You might laugh freely, smile without a second thought. But what if the laughter that echoes in your room at night isn't entirely your own? What if the shadow you catch in the corner of your eye lingers just a second too long? What if, behind the warmth of your joy, something darker is lurking, watching, waiting for a moment to remind you that happiness has a cost? Now, take a moment to think: what would you have done in this story? Would you have stayed silent, blending into the shadows like the townsfolk, or would curiosity have driven you to uncover the truth, no matter the price? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear how you might have faced what the outsider endured. And if this tale left you with a chill that you can't quite shake, why not share it with someone who loves a good scare? After all, stories like these aren't just meant to be heard, they're meant to be passed along, spreading their unease to all who dare to listen. This is just the beginning of the shadows we explore here at Mr. Creep's Nightmares. Stay tuned for our next video, where we delve into the horrifying truth behind the forest that no one escapes. It's a tale of survival, mystery, and something far worse than being lost. Before you go, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another story that will leave you questioning what's real. Here at Mr. Creep's Nightmares, we don't just tell stories, we uncover what hides in the dark. And as we leave this town behind, remember this: a smile may seem harmless, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes, it's an invitation. And sometimes someone, or something, might be waiting to answer it.